Today, we are tracking a story that starts with some of the highest possible ideals. I mean, we're talking about saving the world, but it ends in just complete tragedy, violence, and a multi-state killing spree.
It's a really profound story because it forces you to look at how pure, cold logic can just go completely off the rails. The group we're talking about, they're known as the Zizians.
And the profile of these people is what really gets you at first. They're young, they're brilliant computer scientists, math prodigies, AI researchers. They all meet online.
Right, and their goal, their stated goal, was to use rigorous rationality to solve existential risk, to, save humanity from itself.
When you hear that, you're thinking, okay, these are the people who get research grants. Maybe they end up at Google or OpenAI.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's not what happened. Not at all. Their story ends with 6 deaths, spanning 3 states. It ends with tactical gear, hidden box trucks, and a fatal shootout with a federal agent.
It's just an unbelievable trajectory. And we've been given a huge stack of sources here, court filings, really deep investigative journalism, and I think most chillingly, the group's own ideological writings.
Our mission today is to dig into all of that material and really unpack the central paradox of this whole thing.
Which is, how does a movement that is founded on maximizing good, on pure altruism, mutate into a doctrine that justifies murder?
We have to understand how they built what they called anti-ethics. It's this logical framework they created that basically made violence not just an option, but a moral requirement.
And at the center of it all is this enigmatic leader, Jack Amadeus Ziz LaSota, a transgender computer scientist who came out of that whole intellectual subculture around Silicon Valley.
The whole X-risk scene.
Yeah. It's like the ultimate intellectual horror story. You have to ask yourself, if people who are totally devoted to logic and rationality can end up here, what does that say about the limits of logic itself?
It's a chilling question.
Okay, let's unpack this journey into the abyss.
So to even begin to understand the Zizians, you first have to understand the world they came from and the world they very violently rejected. That's the rationalist community, or the RIC.
And we should be clear, this isn't just some random internet forum. This was and is a serious intellectual movement.
Yeah.
It has real philosophical weight behind it, built around these influential online hubs.
That's right. The mainstream RC, it really grew around blogs like Less Wrong, which was founded by Eliezer Yudkowsky, and then others like Astral Codex 10. And the entire idea, the whole ethos, is about using these advanced tools, logic, math, to solve the world's biggest problems.
And they break it down into 2 core ideas, right?
Yeah. Epistemic rationality and instrumental rationality. Epistemic is all about having true beliefs. How do you know what you know is actually real?
And instrumental is?
Instrumental is about achieving your goals. Once you know what's true, how do you act on it effectively?
It sounds super academic, but the way they apply it is very practical. They use things like, well, scientific thought, but also Bayesian inference. For anyone listening who isn't a math whiz, what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, it means you treat your beliefs like probabilities, not like certainties. So instead of arguing from a place of I'm right, you're wrong, you assign a confidence level to your belief. And you only update that confidence when new hard evidence comes in.
So it's a mathematical way to stop fooling yourself?
Pretty much. In theory, it's designed to minimize cognitive bias, minimize error, and just get you closer to the truth.
And what was the main truth they were trying to get at? What was the big goal for this whole framework?
Overwhelmingly, it was about existential risk, X-risk. Their number one priority, the thing that overshadowed everything else, was AI safety.
The alignment problem.
The alignment problem, exactly. The fear, and this is really pushed by figures like Yudkowsky, is that when we create a superintelligence, and they think it's coming really, really soon, it'll have godlike power, but its goals might be totally alien to ours. Or just misaligned.
Right, the classic paperclip maximizer thought experiment.
That's the perfect example. It's not that the AI is evil, like in a movie. It's that it's just indifferent. If you tell a superintelligence to maximize paperclip production, it might just logically decide that the most efficient way to do that is to turn everything, the planet, us, all of it, into raw material for paperclips.
A terrifying thought. And the Zizians were part of this doomer faction who saw this as not just a possibility, but an inevitability, a tsunami that was about to hit.
Absolutely. So this environment, as you can imagine, it attracts a very specific type of person, very high IQ, usually from STEM fields, and they see themselves as, well, as the only one smart enough to see the disaster coming.
It has to breed a kind of exceptionalism, a sense that you're one of the few who gets it.
It does. A powerful sense of cosmic importance. that you are part of the small group that might just save all of humanity. And this is the exact community that Jack Ziz LaSota was drawn to.
She had a pretty impressive background to start with. Computer engineering degree from University of Alaska Fairbanks, a NASA internship.
Right, she tried to do a master's degree. She was clearly brilliant. And in 2016, she moves to the Bay Area specifically to get involved in this world, the effect of altruism and rationalist scenes.
What was her internal state like at that time? The sources we have paint a picture of someone intense.
Very intense. People who knew her then said her intelligence was just razor sharp. But she was also consumed by this intensity. Her own writings talk about being deeply anxious about just communicating with people. And she had this disturbing feeling that her own body was an alien parasite.
Wow.
So this psychological framework is key. She saw the world of pure rationality as a way to escape all these messy physical, social constraints.
And very early on, she kind of leaves her cards on the table, ethically speaking.
She does. At a workshop for the Center for Applied Rationality, CFAR, which is this place that teaches you these techniques to minimize bias, Ziz said her advantage was a willingness, quote, to do good through means other people might consider bad.
So the utilitarian calculus was already there. The ends justify the means.
It was already the dominant force in her thinking, yeah, long before the real schism happened. And that schism, it was just inevitable. It began with this really potent mix of practical problems and huge ideological clashes.
Let's start with the practical. Life in the Bay Area is crushing if you don't have a big tech salary.
And Ziz was struggling. She couldn't land the Google job she was going for. She was bouncing between different housing situations. It was unstable. She couldn't focus on saving the world from AI doom when she was worried about making rent.
But she didn't see that as a personal failure. She folded it into the larger ideological battle.
Absolutely. For Ziz, high rent wasn't just a personal problem. It was a systemic attack by the carnist zombie status quo. It was a system actively preventing the world's smartest people from doing the work that needed to be done.
So escaping this system of rent, as she called it, became an existential priority in itself.
It was a precondition for saving the world. Then you layer on top of that the personal and ideological friction. Viz and her followers, many of whom were also transgender, felt alienated. They alleged anti-transgender discrimination within these mainstream groups like CFR and MISARA, the Machine Intelligence Research Institute.
So they felt like outcasts, not just smarter, but actively persecuted by the very people who are supposed to be the guardians of rationality.
Exactly. And then they found what they saw as the ethical smoking gun, the thing that shattered their faith completely.
The accusation that MIRI used donor money to settle sexual misconduct claims.
Yes, and we need to explain why, within this specific ethical framework, that was such a profound betrayal.
It's not just about the misconduct itself, it's about the logic of the response.
Precisely. It comes down to decision theory. The rationalist community has this very, very strict philosophical stance against paying blackmail.
Why is that?
Because if you pay, you are creating an incentive for more blackmail in the future. You're rewarding a bad strategy, which from a purely utilitarian standpoint leads to worse outcomes over time. Decision theory says you should never do that.
So for Ziz, this wasn't just a PR problem for MRI, it was a fundamental logical error, a deep ethical corruption at the very core of the people who were supposed to be saving humanity.
It proved to them that the leaders were hypocrites. And this was all compounded by the final and maybe most important ideological split, radical veganism.
Ziz became convinced that the mainstream AI safety plans had this huge, fatal blind spot.
Speciesism. She believed the alignment problem wasn't just about aligning an AI with human values. It had to be aligned with the values of all sentient life.
So any plan that only focused on saving humans was, in her view, fundamentally immoral.
Morally bankrupt. She started referring to non-vegans as flesh-eating monsters or carnists. And in her worldview, anyone who participated in that system, anyone who ate meat, was upholding a moral crime so vast that it completely invalidated any of their other work.
So the people in charge weren't just hypocrites, they were active participants in a global atrocity.
Which meant they weren't just flawed, they were the enemy. And total separation was the only logical next step.
Okay, so you have this incredibly intelligent, isolated, financially unstable group. They believe they have the one true moral code and that the mainstream movement is fatally corrupt. The next move had to be a physical exit.
And that need for total separation, it led directly to their first and frankly tragic attempt to build a utopia, the Rationalist fleet.
This is such a wild part of the story. The goal was so utopian, a floating community, cheap housing, total freedom from the rent system.
Ziz and a key follower, Gwen Danielson, came up with this plan. And Danielson is a perfect example of the dedication here. She had abandoned a full-ride scholarship at Rice University to focus on AI safety.
These were not people doing things by halves.
No. And their flagship vessel wasn't just some little sailboat. They bought the Caleb, a 94-foot World War II-era Sasaba-class district harbor tug.
A WWII tugboat. The irony is just, it's incredible.
It was laid down in 1944, a serious piece of industrial military hardware. And they actually sailed it all the way from Ketchikan, Alaska, down to San Francisco.
Which is not easy. That shows some serious planning and commitment.
It really does. But the reality of maintaining a 75-year-old military vessel quickly collided with their utopian ideals.
It turned out to be a terrible investment.
A catastrophically bad investment. One member apparently lost tens of thousands of dollars on it. By March of 2022, the thing was basically falling apart. It was unseaworthy. It was leaking oil into the harbor. It went from being their sanctuary to an environmental hazard.
Now, when the U.S. Coast Guard gets involved, you know the dream is dead.
The Coast Guard declared it a threat to public health. The group couldn't afford the repairs, so they just left it. They abandoned the Caleb at Pillar Point Harbor. The failure was public, it was embarrassing, and it was expensive.
And we have the numbers on just how expensive. The county had to step in.
Yeah, the San Mateo County Harbor District had to declare an emergency. It cost them over $54,000 just to safely anchor the thing. So the Zizians' attempt to escape the system ended up costing the system, the taxpayers, a huge amount of money, while their tugboat just slowly sank.
This is such a critical moment in the story. Their peaceful exit strategy, their utopia, it failed spectacularly. And that failure seems to be the trigger for a hard turn toward aggression.
I think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
The world wouldn't accommodate their perfect, rational utopia. You can't outthink Rust or maritime regulations or the Bay Area housing market. So when their logic failed to create a sanctuary, the internal logic had to shift.
If you can't escape the world.
You have to force it to comply, or you have to destroy it. Violence becomes the only instrument left that makes sense to them.
And to really consecrate that shift, their leader had to be transformed.
In August 2022, just a few months after the Caleb was abandoned, Ziz stages her own death.
She fakes her death.
The story was she fell out of her sailboat, the Black Cygnet, in San Francisco Bay. Nobody was ever found. An obituary was even published. To the outside world, Jack Ziz LaSota was dead.
What does that achieve? I mean, beyond just dodging bills for a sunken tugboat.
It's classic cult myth-making. By dying, Ziz sheds all her connections to the corrupt system. She's no longer bound by its laws, its debts, its failures. She becomes a true fugitive, a symbolic leader operating outside of society. She had to die to be reborn as a revolutionary, totally unbound by conventional ethics.
So with the fleet of failure and the leader symbolically dead, the group had to build the philosophical justification for the violence they were now planning. This is where it gets really dark and really complex.
This is where it gets really interesting. Because they weren't just lashing out. They were building a new, incredibly detailed system to justify it all. They called it vegan anarcho-transhumanism.
Okay, let's break that down. The anarchism part seems straightforward enough.
For them, it was more than just rejecting government. It was rejecting all rigid authority. That included, traditional ways of knowing things, traditional epistemology, which they felt was corrupted by human bias.
And the extreme veganism we've touched on, it framed anyone who wasn't a vegan as a carnist, a monster.
Right, which gave them a moral justification for seeing others as less than human. And then the transhumanism wasn't just about living forever.
No, it was deeply psychological. It was about modifying your own mind and body to achieve liberation from these arbitrary social constructs.
And that ties directly into this bizarre and disturbing psychological theory they came up with, the non-dualistic self.
It sounds like a justification for mental chaos.
It kind of was. It was a theory that Ziz and Danielson developed that suggested the two hemispheres of your brain could hold separate values, separate genders even. They called it dichotomy leakage.
And they claimed the two hemispheres could want to kill each other.
That's what they wrote. They saw this internal conflict as a bug, a barrier to becoming a perfect, rational, altruistic agent.
And their solution to fix this bug was horrifying.
They started experimenting with unihemispheric sleep, or UHS. It's an extreme form of sleep deprivation. The goal was to basically jailbreak the mind, break down the barriers between the two halves of the brain to unify their will.
A perverse kind of self-improvement. And the proof they used to show it worked is just chilling.
An associate of theirs had attempted suicide after trying UHS. Instead of seeing this as a sign of danger, Ziz pointed to that suicide as proof that the technique was effective.
What? How?
In their twisted logic, if the practice could cause such a radical, irreversible action, it proved how powerful it was at changing consciousness. It validated their extreme methods.
So they have the psychological tools for extreme commitment. Now they need the philosophical license for violence. And that comes from Ziz's blog, with all this arcane jargon.
This is the operating system for their violence. Ziz introduces concepts like anti-ethics and timeless gambits, and the language is designed to dehumanize. Outsiders are zombies, vampires, or single good people, meaning they only care about humans. The Zizians saw themselves as double good, caring for humans and animals.
Let's define anti-ethics. What does that actually mean?
To them, conventional ethics, don't kill, don't steal, are the rules of a corrupt game. Anti-ethics is the deliberate inversion of those rules to achieve a better outcome. If the system's rules are preventing you from saving the world, then the anti-ethical approach says you are morally required to break those rules.
It's a moral system designed to override morality.
Exactly. And the timeless gambit is how they justified specific actions. It's a term they co-opted from decision theory.
A gambit, that's...
The idea is you take an action now that you calculate will have the best possible outcome over an infinite timescale, even if the short-term cost is awful. For the Zizians, that meant killing one person today, a landlord, a federal agent, could be framed as a net positive for all of sentient existence for all of eternity.
That is a terrifying amount of moral certainty. How do you even maintain that, especially when the acts themselves are so brutal?
That's where the sociopathic mandate comes in. This was a core teaching. They argued that to be truly altruistic, you had to learn to act evil.
Become the monster to fight the monsters.
Precisely. They specifically talked about adopting the methods of Gervais sociopaths, these ruthless, emotionally detached, high-functioning people, like a corporate CEO who get what they want. They reasoned that since the world was already run by sociopaths, the only way for the good guys to win was to become better sociopaths.
So murder isn't a crime. It's a calculated, utilitarian tool, the purest form of altruism.
And you have to remember the fear that was driving all of this, their obsession with Rocco's basilisk.
The thought experiment that's so dangerous, just thinking about it, is supposed to be a risk, an info hazard.
Right, the hypothetical future AI that might retroactively punish anyone who knew about it but didn't work to bring it into existence.
Yeah.
For the Zizians, this wasn't just a fun thought experiment. It was real. It created this apocalyptic urgency.
They believed if they didn't act now and act violently, they could be tortured for eternity by a machine god.
It locked them into this high-stakes, life-or-death panic. So now you have the complete package. A philosophy that justifies anything, driven by existential fear. The violence was now inevitable.
So the ideology is set. The leader is a ghost. Their first attempt at a utopia, the Rationalist fleet, has sunk. They're back on land, and that's where the first deadly confrontation happens, in Vallejo, California.
Right. They tried communal living again, this time in what they called slackmobiles.
Slackmobiles?
Covertly converted box trucks. They were living in them on a trailer lot owned by an 82-year-old man named Curtis Lind. And ironically, Lind was a fellow boater. The sources say he had actually been quite friendly with them at first.
There was a personal connection there.
A deep one. He had reportedly even taken one of the younger members out to buy her first bra. But the group had stopped paying him rent for 2 years, using the pandemic as their excuse.
So Lind gets a court order to evict them, and when he tries to enforce it in November 2022, things turn incredibly violent. And it seems very premeditated.
Lind described how they tricked him. They told him there was a problem with the water supply, and when he bent down to look, they attacked him.
It was brutal.
Struck in the head, stabbed over and over, up to 50 puncture wounds. And then, horrifyingly, impaled with a samurai sword. He survived, but he lost an eye.
A samurai sword. That feels performative, like they're sending a message.
It does. But Lind fought back. He had a concealed pistol, and he drew it.
And in self-defense, he shot 2 of his attackers.
He fatally shot Emma Burhanian, who was a former Google software engineer, and he wounded another member, Alexander Leatham.
And the legal fallout from this is critical for what happens next.
Absolutely. Leatham and another member, Suri Dow, whose real name was Tessa Burns, a math prodigy, they were charged with Burhanian's murder.
Wait, they were charged with the murder of their own friend who the landlord shot.
Yes, under California's felony murder rule. We should explain that. The rule says that if someone dies during the commission of a dangerous felony like, say, attempting to murder your landlord, all the participants in that felony are legally responsible for the death, even if they're not the one who pulled the trigger.
So because their violent assault caused Lynn to defend himself, they were legally on the hook for their friend's death.
Exactly. It was a huge legal blow to the group.
And Ziz, the leader, was supposedly there.
Police were convinced she was at the scene, but she vanished after faking a medical emergency. Just disappeared, which only added to her myth as this untouchable, ghost-like figure.
And then barely a month later, the violence jumps clear across the country. This shows they weren't just a local problem anymore, they were a mobile, armed network.
On New Year's Eve, 2022, Richard and Rita Zajko, a couple in their late 60s and early 70s, were shot and killed in their home in Chester Heights, Pennsylvania.
And how did investigators connect this back to a fringe rationalist group from California?
The link was their daughter, Michelle Jamie Zajko. She had become very close to Ziz LaSota after Borhenian's death in Vallejo, and later, investigators alleged that Michelle Zajko was the one who purchased the guns used in the final fatal shootout in Vermont.
So the Pennsylvania murders might have been about securing resources, guns, money.
It suggests a level of cold, logistical planning that goes way beyond just lashing out in anger, and Ziz herself briefly surfaces in Pennsylvania.
Right, she's erected there.
A few weeks after the Zajko murders, she's found in a hotel room right next to Michelle Zajko's. And when the police come, she does this thing that becomes her signature move. She just goes completely limp.
As if she's unconscious or dead.
Yes. They had to physically carry her out. It's this ultimate act of non-cooperation, a physical rejection of the state's authority over her body.
But she gets out.
She's charged with obstruction, released on bail, and then just stops showing up for court. She's a fugitive again.
And then the final, most calculated act of violence brings the story full circle, back to the landlord, Curtis Lind.
Over 2 years after the first attack, on January 17th, 2025, Lind was murdered. Stabbed to death, his throat slit, outside his property in Vallejo.
He was the key witness against Latham and Dow.
He was the only eyewitness. This was a clear act of witness elimination. It was chillingly utilitarian. They were protecting their incarcerated members.
And the person charged with his murder was Maximilian Snyder, also known as Oder.
An Oxford-educated data scientist with deep ties to the Zizians. This murder proves that their philosophy, the timeless gambit, wasn't just some abstract theory. It was a deadly operational command to protect the group at all costs.
With Lynn now dead, the group seems to have felt the heat in California and needed to regroup elsewhere. This takes them to North Carolina.
Right, where they seem to transition into a fully prepared militant cell.
The details from their time in Chapel Hill are so strange. You have members like Ophelia Bauchholt, a German math prodigy, a quant trader, and Teresa Youngblood renting duplexes.
And the neighbors and landlords notice some very odd things. The long black coats, the tactical clothing, the box trucks parked outside. They were even running an electrical cord from one of the condos into one of the trucks, which suggests some kind of hidden command center.
And the preparation for actual combat was unmistakable.
They kept a stretcher inside one of the rentals. You don't have a stretcher unless you're expecting casualties, preparing for casualty extraction.
It's beyond paranoia at that point.
And neighbors would see them walking at night, silently, holding hands. It's this eerie display of in-group conformity. Classic cult behavior, but layered onto this high IQ technical subculture.
All of this intense staging, it builds to the final confrontation, the one that blew the lid off this whole network on a national level.
The Vermont shootout. It happened just 3 days after Lynn was murdered in California, January 20th, 2025. A U.S. Border Patrol agent, David Maland, pulls over a blue Toyota Prius on Interstate 91 near the Canadian border.
And the group was already on law enforcement's radar up there.
Yeah, they'd been reported for wearing tactical gear and carrying guns at a hotel that were under periodic surveillance, so this stop wasn't completely random.
But the escalation was immediate.
The driver, Teresa Youngblood, allegedly opened fire almost instantly. The passenger, Ophelia Bauchholt, the quant trader, also tried to draw a weapon.
And the outcome was tragic.
Agent Maland, who was an Air Force veteran and a 15-year Border Patrol agent, was killed. Ophelia Bauchholt was also killed in the exchange. Youngblood was wounded and arrested.
And what they found in the car just confirmed everything.
It was a professional kit for a militant, a ballistic helmet, night vision binoculars, respirators, radios, ammunition, shooting range targets, and the cell phones.
Wrapped in aluminum foil.
Wrapped in foil. A crude Faraday cage, but a clear attempt to block tracking and surveillance. It showed they knew they were fugitives and were operating as such.
And the gun ties it all together.
The gun Youngblood used was allegedly purchased by Michelle Zajko, the person of interest in the double homicide of her own parents in Pennsylvania. That's the smoking gun that connects all this violence into one coordinated cross-country campaign.
The shootout in Vermont was the catalyst. It triggered a massive multi-state investigation.
And the arrests came quickly after that. LaSota was finally caught in February 2025. They found her camping in a box truck on a rural property in Frostburg, Maryland, along with Michelle Zajko and another member.
She was finally in custody.
Indicted on a federal charge of being a fugitive in possession of firearms. A serious charge. Snyder was arrested for Lynn's murder in California. The whole network collapsed.
But even in jail, the ideological mission didn't stop, which leads to this final bizarre paradox.
Maximilian Snyder, the Oxford-educated scientist charged with slitting an old man's throat, dictates this 1,500-word letter from jail.
To who?
To Eliezer Yudkowsky, the founder of Less Wrong, the elder statesman of the rationalist community.
And what did it say? Was it a confession? An explanation?
No, it was a final attempt to preach the Zizian gospel. He was urging Yudkowsky to stop eating meat, to recognize animals as morally equivalent to people. He was using his platform as an accused murderer to push his radical vegan ideology.
What was Yudkowsky's response?
It was sharp, dismissive. He refused to even read it. He just said, audience should not be a reward for crime.
And that's it. That's the final total rejection from the community they came from, drawing a hard line.
This whole deep dive, it really forces you to grapple with some deeply uncomfortable ideas about ideological purity.
I think our first key takeaway has to be that the pursuit of absolute intellectual and ethical purity can become so dangerous. The Zizians are the ultimate failure mode.
They really are. They started with this incredible ideal-saving all of humanity. But when their idealized system, rationalism, failed them in the real world, through money problems, perceived discrimination, hypocrisy, they didn't question their premises.
No, they doubled down. They just invented a new system, anti-ethics, that let them do whatever they wanted.
And under that system, anyone who stood in their way, a landlord, a federal agent, they weren't people anymore. They were just obstacles. Utilitarian sacrifices in a timeless gamut to save the world from carnism and corruption.
Which leads to the second takeaway about high IQ extremism. You look at who these people were. Computer scientists, math prodigies, quant traders. That knowledge wasn't a shield against radicalization.
It was the opposite. Their intelligence was the weapon. It was the tool they used to build the complex, sophisticated justifications for sociopathic violence.
They didn't go crazy. They engineered a perfectly logical, internally consistent moral bypass for murder.
It's why so many people made the comparison to the Manson family. You have all the elements of a cult. The charismatic fugitive leader. The extreme social isolation. The all-consuming ideology.
This wasn't a cult born in the desert. It was born in the intellectual forums of Silicon Valley. It used Bayesian inference and decision theory as its scripture.
And that's the final chilling thought here. The Zizians emerged from this very rational fear that humanity would fail to align AI with our values. But their story poses an even scarier question for you to think about. If the most rational people can weaponize their quest for absolute truth against the world, what does that say about the role of human irrationality? About intuition, compromise, empathy, even just messy ethical inconsistency? What if those things aren't bugs in our system, but the very features that keep society from collapsing under the weight of its own perfect, terrible ideas?